Why urban living is making us sick. Your brain is being rewired every day you live in a city. The constant noise from traffic is triggering your amygdala to release stress hormones at rates 39% higher than rural dwellers. And that's just one of the invisible dangers all around you. In this documentary, we're measuring the true cost of urban living on your mental health and revealing how new AI and biosensor technology might be our only hope for surviving the concrete jungle. The solutions are more urgent than you think, with 68% of humanity projected to live in cities by 2050. The urban mental health crisis. Urban dwellers face a 39% higher risk of mood disorders than their rural counterparts. This striking disparity represents millions of people worldwide experiencing the psychological burden of city living. But what exactly about urban environments triggers this mental health gap? We are witnessing the greatest migration in human history. The United Nations projects that by 2050, 68% of the global population will live in urban areas. That's 2/3 of humanity concentrated in cities, like billions of people crowded onto increasingly dense islands of concrete and glass. This mass urbanization represents an unprecedented experiment in human psychology as our brains, evolved over millennia for different environments, attempt to adapt to dense, high-stimulation urban settings. The paradox of city living lies in its simultaneous offerings of opportunity and psychological strain. Cities concentrate economic possibilities, cultural experiences, educational institutions, and social connections. They are engines of innovation and progress. Yet beneath these advantages lurks a hidden cost that researchers have only recently begun to quantify. Significant impacts on our psychological well-being. For decades, mental health researchers struggled to disentangle the psychological effects of city living from socioeconomic factors. Were mental health differences due to the urban environment itself, or simply because cities often concentrate poverty, inequality, and other social stressors? Did cities attract people predisposed to mental health challenges, or did the urban environment create these conditions? Methodologically sophisticated research designs have now isolated the true urban effect. Twin studies examining identical twins with shared genetic profiles living in different settings revealed significant variations in mental health outcomes that couldn't be attributed to genetics or childhood experiences. Meanwhile, longitudinal studies tracking individuals relocating between urban and rural environments showed that moving to denser urban settings frequently coincided with declining mental health metrics, while moving to less dense environments often produced improvements, even when controlling for socioeconomic factors. These complementary approaches provide compelling evidence that urban environments themselves influence our psychological health. Neuroimaging studies offer perhaps the most striking evidence of how our brains respond to urban environments. Research from Germany's Central Institute of Mental Health found that urban dwellers showed significantly higher activity in the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, compared to rural residents. Even more revealing, those who grew up in cities showed heightened activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, which regulates the amygdala and processes negative emotions. Like an electrical system constantly operating at high voltage, the urban brain appears permanently altered by its environment. These neural differences manifest as measurable physiological changes throughout urban resident bodies. City dwellers typically show altered cortisol patterns, with a primary stress hormone failing to follow its natural daily rhythm. Their autonomic nervous systems maintain higher fight-or-flight activation and reduced rest and digest function. This imbalance contributes to elevated blood pressure, immune dysregulation, and disrupted sleep, creating a physiological environment primed for psychological distress. These biological alterations translate directly to clinical outcomes. Beyond mood disorders, city dwellers experience anxiety disorders at rates 21% higher than rural populations. Urban children show higher rates of attention deficits and impulse control problems. These disparities remain consistent across cultures and continents, even accounting for healthcare access differences. What's particularly concerning is how these effects accumulate over time. each year of urban living during critical developmental periods increases mental health risks. Research published in the Journal of Psychiatric Research found urban upbringing doubled the risk for schizophrenia, an effect persisting even when participants later moved to rural areas. This suggests early urban exposure may permanently alter neurological development. The relationship between urbanicity and mental health shows a dose-response pattern. As population density increases, so do mental health risks. Megacities with populations exceeding 10 million show the highest rates of psychological distress, while medium-sized cities present intermediate risks. This strongly suggests specific urban characteristics drive these outcomes rather than simply non-rural factors. These effects aren't distributed equally across urban populations. Socioeconomic privilege offers significant buffering against urban stressors. Those with financial resources can afford housing that shields them from noise, provides private outdoor space, and offers escape through travel. Meanwhile, disadvantaged urban residents often experience concentrated exposure to the most damaging aspects of urban environments with the fewest resources for mitigation. Cultural and historical context also matters significantly. Cities designed around human-scale interaction, like many European urban centers, generally show better mental health outcomes than sprawling, car-dependent cities typical in North America and parts of Asia. This suggests urban form itself plays a crucial role in psychological impacts. Gender differences appear consistently in the research as well. Women in urban environments typically report higher levels of perceived stress and show higher rates of diagnosed anxiety disorders, while men exhibit higher rates of substance use disorders and antisocial behaviors. These gendered responses likely reflect both biological differences in stress response and socialized coping mechanisms. The cumulative evidence has shifted urban mental health from a fringe research area to a central public health concern. The World Health Organization now recognizes urbanization as a significant determinant of population mental health, calling for urban planning approaches that prioritize psychological well-being alongside traditional metrics like economic growth and physical infrastructure. This recognition comes at a critical moment. As climate change accelerates and populations continue to concentrate in cities, understanding and mitigating urban psychological stressors becomes increasingly urgent. The good news is that cities are highly modifiable environments. Unlike many other mental health risk factors, urban stressors can be redesigned, regulated, and reimagined through intentional policy choices. The noise pollution nightmare. While urban planners focus on visible pollution, an invisible form of contamination may be doing even more damage to city residents. In major metropolitan areas, the constant soundtrack of urban life triggers a biological cascade that fundamentally alters how your body functions, even while you sleep. The average city resident experiences ambient noise levels between 60 and 70 decibels throughout the day, equivalent to having a constant conversation happening just a few feet away. This sonic backdrop follows you everywhere. During sleep, many urbanites experience nighttime noise levels above 45 decibels, exceeding the World Health Organization's recommended maximum of 40 decibels for restful sleep. It's like having an alarm clock that never truly shuts off, constantly keeping your body on edge. I've lived next to the freeway for 7 years, explains Elena Rodriguez, a Chicago resident. I don't consciously notice the traffic anymore, but my doctor says my blood pressure tells a different story. Urban noise researchers categorize sonic intrusions into distinct sources. Traffic noise dominates most urban soundscapes, creating a near-constant low-frequency rumble penetrating building walls. Construction noise produces some of the most disruptive high-decibel intrusions, regularly exceeding 85 decibels, the threshold where hearing damage becomes a concern. Neighbor noise creates unpredictable sound patterns our brains particularly notice. Commercial noise from restaurants and bars creates focal points of high-volume activity, while mechanical noise from HVAC systems and generators adds a persistent background hum. Noise pollution functions as a profound physiological stressor affecting us whether we consciously notice it or not. The human auditory system evolved as an early warning mechanism that remains partially active even during sleep. When unexpected or loud noises occur, your nervous system responds automatically. This vigilance system triggers a cascade of biological reactions. Within milliseconds of detecting a noise event, your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, activates. This triggers your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, releasing cortisol and adrenaline into your bloodstream. Your heart rate increases, blood vessels constrict, and digestion slows as your body shifts into a fight or flight state. Blood pressure increases and inflammatory markers rise, all without conscious awareness. What makes urban noise particularly insidious is that these responses occur even when you've subjectively gotten used to the noise. A 2019 study measured stress biomarkers in people living near major airports for over 5 years. Despite reporting they hardly noticed aircraft noise anymore, their bodies told a different story. During noise events, their cortisol levels spiked and heart rate variability decreased, clear stress indicators, even while they remained asleep. I thought I had adapted to the subway beneath my apartment, shares Marcus Tate, a Boston resident. But my sleep tracker showed I was waking briefly dozens of times each night without realizing it. After moving to a quieter neighborhood, my anxiety improved dramatically. This physiological reality explains findings from a multi-year study following residents near Frankfurt Airport. As air traffic patterns changed, researchers tracked both noise levels and medication usage. Neighborhoods newly exposed to flight paths saw a 61% increase in anti-anxiety medication prescriptions and a 54% increase in antidepressant usage within 24 months. Areas where noise mitigation reduced decibel levels saw corresponding decreases in medication usage. A Danish cohort study tracking over 50,000 urban residents found that for every 10 decibel increase in road traffic noise, depression risk increased by 4% and anxiety disorders by 6%. Higher and more frequent noise exposure correlated linearly with worse outcomes. The strongest associations appeared in areas with nighttime noise events, suggesting sleep disruption plays a critical role in noise-related mental health impacts. The cumulative effect of these repeated stress activations creates allostatic load, the wear and tear on the body from chronic stress. Noise-induced stress in urban environments can continue 24 hours daily for years. This constant activation gradually depletes stress response systems. Cortisol patterns flatten, inflammatory pathways become chronically activated, and the autonomic nervous system shifts toward fight or flight dominance. A comprehensive 2018 meta-analysis examining 103 studies found urban noise exposure independently associated with hypertension, cardiovascular disease, metabolic disorders, and immune system dysregulation. These physical conditions frequently co-occur with anxiety and depression, creating a complex relationship between noise exposure, physiological damage, and psychological distress. Noise exposure appears to alter brain structure itself. A 2017 brain imaging study found urban residents exposed to high noise levels for over 5 years showed decreased gray matter volume in regions associated with emotional regulation, similar to patterns seen in chronic stress conditions. These structural changes correlated with both noise exposure duration and intensity. The noise-mental health relationship becomes apparent when examining medication patterns. For every 10 decibel increase in environmental noise, anxiety medication use rises by approximately 28%, even when controlling for socioeconomic factors and other urban stressors. Noise exposure disproportionately affects lower-income neighborhoods. A 2020 analysis of major U.S. cities found neighborhoods below the poverty line experienced average noise levels 6 to 8 decibels higher than affluent areas in the same cities. Lower income housing typically has poorer sound insulation. A study measuring indoor-outdoor noise ratios found luxury apartments blocked approximately 80% of external noise, while affordable housing blocked only 30 to 40%. Mitigating urban noise requires a comprehensive approach. Infrastructure solutions like sound barriers, low-noise pavement, and building insulation requirements can significantly reduce community exposure. Urban planning policies restricting nighttime construction, rerouting traffic from residential areas, and creating quiet zones around schools and hospitals show promising results. Individual interventions like acoustic treatments, soundproof windows, and white noise machines can help create acoustic sanctuaries within urban environments. Crowded loneliness, the paradox of urban density. Beyond the soundscapes that shape our urban experience lies an even stranger phenomenon. The more densely packed we become with neighbors, the more psychologically isolated we feel. How can you be lonely in a city of 8 million people? This paradox of urban density represents one of the most counterintuitive aspects of city living. Researchers at the University of Chicago found that residents of high-density apartment buildings reported feeling more socially isolated than those in less crowded neighborhoods, despite having more potential social contacts within steps of their door. This phenomenon, termed crowded loneliness, describes a psychological state unique to dense urban environments where physical proximity paradoxically increases feelings of social distance. When we examine our evolutionary history, humans evolved in small groups where we knew everyone around us. Our brains developed to process and maintain meaningful relationships with approximately 150 people, Dunbar's number, named after the anthropologist who identified this cognitive limit. Picture yourself on a crowded subway car, surrounded by dozens of strangers. Your brain, designed to know and interact with a limited number of individuals, becomes overwhelmed as it attempts to process all these unknown faces, creating a fundamental mismatch between our ancestral programming and current reality. This overwhelming social stimuli triggers defensive distancing, a protective psychological mechanism. In elevators and common areas of high-rise buildings, residents actively avoid eye contact, maintaining what sociologists call civil inattention. This behavior isn't rudeness, but an adaptive response to social overload. Neurobiologically, this makes perfect sense. The human brain cannot process meaningful social connections with thousands of people simultaneously. When faced with this impossible task, our neural circuitry enters a protective state, filtering out excess social information and creating psychological barriers. Studies using functional MRI scanning at Columbia University showed that the brains of long-term city dwellers actually process faces differently than rural residents, with diminished activity in regions responsible for emotional connection during stranger recognition tasks. The sensory overload becomes evident in public transportation. A 2018 observational study of subway commuters found that 93% engaged in social insulation behavior, using headphones, focusing on phones, or adopting the urban gaze, looking through rather than at other passengers. These are coping mechanisms for managing excessive social stimuli. This withdrawal response manifests physiologically. McGill University researchers monitored stress biomarkers in residents of various housing densities and found significantly elevated cortisol levels in high-density housing compared to matched neighborhoods with similar socioeconomic factors, but lower population density. These elevated cortisol levels persisted even when controlling for noise exposure, suggesting something about human density itself triggers stress responses. The threshold where density triggers these responses varies culturally. Japanese urbanites showed higher tolerance thresholds for crowding before exhibiting stress responses than New Yorkers, demonstrating how cultural factors modulate psychological responses to density. However, beyond certain thresholds, all populations showed similar stress patterns. Urban crowding overwhelms our brain's facial recognition systems. Humans evolved to recognize and remember faces, a critical survival skill in ancestral environments. In modern megacities, our neural architecture becomes overloaded. A 2020 study found that after just 20 minutes in crowded urban settings, participants showed a 32% decrease in facial recognition accuracy. This creates familiar stranger syndrome, repeatedly seeing the same people without forming connections, further intensifying the sensation of being anonymous in a crowd. The psychological consequences extend beyond momentary discomfort. Long-term exposure to high-density environments without compensatory social connection creates urban anonymity syndrome, characterized by heightened vigilance, reduced trust in strangers, and increased feelings of isolation despite constant human proximity. A longitudinal study found significant increases in social anxiety and decreases in neighborhood trust over 18 months in residents who moved from moderate to high-density housing. These adaptations manifest in measurable behavioral changes. Urban planners have documented territory marking behaviors in high-density housing, residents creating psychological boundaries through noise complaints, territorial disputes over shared spaces, and heightened sensitivity to neighbor activities. These natural responses occur when personal space feels continuously invaded. Neuroscientists documented how chronic crowding alters activity in the hypothalamus and amygdala, regions responsible for threat assessment and stress response. These changes cascade through multiple physiological systems, contributing to urban health disparities. This phenomenon reinforces itself as people withdraw from casual social interaction, making urban environments less friendly. A 2021 study found that high-density neighborhoods with low social cohesion showed significantly higher rates of diagnosed depression than either low-density areas or equally dense areas with strong community ties. Architectural design can mitigate these effects. Singapore's Housing Development Board found that high-rise buildings incorporating shared spaces, community gardens, and designs encouraging casual interaction showed higher social cohesion and lower reported loneliness than similar buildings without these features. The issue isn't density itself, but how. That density is structured. Digital technology complicates this picture. While smartphones maintain connections with distant contacts, they facilitate withdrawal from immediate surroundings. Studies show significant decreases in spontaneous social interactions after smartphone adoption, with alone-together behavior becoming common, physically present but psychologically absent from shared spaces. This creates a feedback loop where technology connects us globally while disconnecting us locally. A 2020 survey found that people in the highest density neighborhoods reported knowing significantly fewer neighbors by name than those in moderate or low density areas, despite having hundreds more people living nearby. The psychological impact of this paradoxical isolation is substantial. Urban residents experiencing crowded loneliness show heightened rates of anxiety, irritability, and defensive territoriality. A comprehensive study found that perceived social isolation, independent of actual social contact, predicted psychological distress more strongly than noise or pollution. The urban sleep crisis. As research now reveals, city residents get an average of 40 minutes less sleep per night than their rural counterparts. This sleep deficit represents critical recovery time that urban brains desperately need to process the overwhelming daily stimuli of city life. Sleep is perhaps the most fundamental yet overlooked factor in the urban mental health equation. While we often focus on the visible stressors of city life, the crowds, the noise, the pace, we rarely consider how these urban environments systematically undermine our most essential recovery mechanism. This sleep deficit accumulates night after night, creating a biological debt that cannot easily be repaid. Urban environments have engineered what sleep scientists call the perfect storm of sleep disruptors. Noise pollution from late-night traffic and emergency vehicles combines with light pollution from streetlights and digital billboards that suppresses melatonin production. Add to this the urban heat island effect, where concrete surfaces retain heat throughout the night, creating temperatures up to 7 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than surrounding rural areas. Far from the ideal cool sleeping environment our bodies evolved to expect. This urban sleep crisis has reached alarming proportions. Research from Stanford University's Sleep Medicine Division has documented that nearly 1 in 10 city residents consistently get less than 6 hours of sleep nightly, well below the recommended 7 to 9 hours. Dr. Rafael Pelayo, clinical professor at Stanford Sleep Medicine Center, notes that urban environments have created unprecedented challenges to human sleep architecture that our evolutionary biology simply hasn't adapted to overcome. Consider Sarah, a 32-year-old marketing professional in Chicago. Her typical day begins with a jarring alarm at 6 a.m. after just 5.5 hours of sleep, interrupted twice by emergency sirens. By afternoon, her ability to focus in meetings deteriorates. Small irritations, a colleague speaking too loudly, a delayed train, trigger disproportionate frustration. By evening, she's too mentally exhausted to exercise, but too wired from screen exposure to fall asleep easily, continuing the cycle. This pattern creates a vicious cycle of deteriorating mental health. Urban stressors disrupt sleep, and this poor sleep quality then lowers our threshold for stress the following day. With diminished cognitive resources, urban residents become more reactive to the very stressors that disrupted their sleep initially. Dr. Matthew Walker, neuroscientist and sleep expert, describes this as a neurological trap where poor sleep and heightened stress perpetually reinforce each other. The neurological impact extends far beyond simple fatigue. Sleep disruption particularly affects the prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for emotional regulation, impulse control, and rational decision-making. This region is essentially taken offline during sleep deprivation, leaving the more primitive emotional centers, like the amygdala, to dominate our responses. The evidence is striking. A landmark study at UC Berkeley used functional MRI to examine sleep-deprived urban residents' brains. They found a 60% amplification of reactivity in the amygdala and a corresponding decrease in prefrontal regulatory systems. The sleep-deprived urban brain becomes hypervigilant to potential threats while simultaneously losing its ability to contextually evaluate and regulate emotional responses. This neurological imbalance creates what researchers call emotional amplification, where minor irritations trigger disproportionately strong reactions. Urban residents experiencing chronic sleep disruption report feeling constantly on edge and emotionally raw in environments requiring complex social navigation. Long-term data reveals even more concerning patterns. A comprehensive 15-year study tracking sleep patterns across metropolitan areas found that urban residents experiencing chronic sleep deficits showed a 68% higher likelihood of developing clinical depression compared to those with healthy sleep patterns, even after controlling for other risk factors. Several mechanisms drive this connection. REM sleep plays a crucial role in processing emotional experiences and consolidating memories. Urban environments that fragment REM sleep through intermittent noise disruptions prevent this essential emotional processing. As Dr. E.T.I. Ben-Simon, a sleep researcher at UC Berkeley explains, without sufficient REM sleep, negative emotional experiences aren't properly integrated and diffused, leading to a progressive accumulation of psychological distress. The urban sleep crisis also impairs social cognition. Studies show that sleep-deprived individuals demonstrate reduced empathy, impaired face recognition, and diminished ability to interpret others' emotional states, all critical skills for navigating complex social landscapes. This creates another reinforcing cycle. Sleep deprivation increases social strain, which further contributes to psychological distress. This sleep deficit is inequitably distributed. Residents of lower-income neighborhoods frequently experience the worst sleep conditions due to higher ambient noise, greater light pollution, inadequate sound insulation, higher population density, and often shift work schedules. A study found that residents of disadvantaged urban neighborhoods got an average of 46 minutes less sleep per night than those in affluent areas. Dr. Lauren Hale, professor of preventive medicine, explains, poor sleep functions as both a symptom and a cause of health disparities, creating a self-reinforcing cycle where disadvantaged populations face both greater exposure to sleep-disrupting conditions and fewer resources to mitigate those disruptions. Developing brains show particularly concerning patterns. Urban teenagers get an average of 6.5 hours of sleep per night, far below the 8 to 10 hours recommended for optimal brain development. This sleep deficit during critical developmental periods has been linked to impaired academic performance, increased risk-taking behaviors, and vulnerability to mood disorders that can persist into adulthood. The urban sleep crisis represents a hidden but substantial public health challenge. Chronic sleep disruption significantly exacerbates symptoms of anxiety and depression, creating a pervasive risk factor for urban mental health that often goes unrecognized. The accumulated sleep debt of urban living fundamentally alters how our wearable biosensors, measuring the invisible threat. Beyond the visible stressors of city living lies a physiological reality most urbanites never consciously register. Your body is experiencing significant stress responses up to 15 minutes before you're even aware of feeling stressed. This is where wearable biosensors are revealing the true biological cost of urban life. The technology we've casually adopted to count our steps has evolved into sophisticated stress detection systems, offering unprecedented insights into how our bodies respond to urban environments. These devices capture the subtle physiological shifts occurring beneath conscious awareness, functioning like early warning systems for our bodies, alerting us to dangers our conscious mind hasn't yet processed. The MIT Urban Physiology Project demonstrated this gap between perception and reality starkly. Researchers equipped 347 Boston commuters with comprehensive biosensor arrays tracking 6 distinct physiological markers simultaneously. The results were startling. Participants consistently rated their morning commute stress as moderate, averaging 4.2 on a 10-point scale, while their bodies told a dramatically different story. The typical commuter experienced cortisol spikes averaging 42%, physiologically equivalent to a moderate anxiety attack, despite reporting feeling just fine. We found consistent disconnects between subjective reporting and objective physiological measurements, explains Dr. Rosalind Picard, founder of the Effective Computing Research Group at MIT. Many participants were genuinely surprised when shown their data. They had normalized these stress responses to such a degree they no longer registered them consciously. Modern biosensors track a comprehensive range of bodily signals. Electrodermal activity measuring microscopic sweat secretions, heart rate variability reflecting autonomic nervous system balance, cortisol levels via sweat analysis, respiratory patterns, blood pressure fluctuations, and muscle tension, creating a complete picture of stress response impossible to detect through self-reporting alone. The University of Chicago's Urban Biometric Project deployed these multi-parameter sensors in a groundbreaking study across 5 major U.S. cities. Participants wore sensors continuously for 30 days while researchers mapped their physiological responses against GPS data, creating detailed stress geographies of urban environments. We identified specific urban microstressors that previous research methods completely missed, notes Dr. Katarina Felsky, the study's lead investigator. For instance, walking past certain building shapes consistently triggered autonomic stress responses. Structures with reflective glass facades that create sudden temperature changes and disruptive glare patterns cause measurable physiological stress despite participants rarely noting these as stressors in interviews. These microstressors accumulate throughout a city dweller's day. The Barcelona Urban Sensing Initiative documented how crossing unprotected intersections triggered sharp spikes in electrodermal activity, even on low-traffic streets. Similarly, navigating complex transit transfers, even when running smoothly, produced sustained elevations in physiological stress markers. Perhaps most revealing was the Columbia University Medical Center's 2021 Urban Rhythm Study, which tracked 189 Manhattan residents continuously for 3 months. Researchers discovered that the body often registers environmental stressors well before conscious awareness kicks in. When passing construction sites, participants' HRV measurements showed stress responses beginning approximately 15 minutes before the noise became audible, likely triggered by subtle environmental cues like changed pedestrian patterns or barely perceptible vibrations. The body's threat detection systems operate below the threshold of consciousness, explains neurophysiologist Dr. Marcus Chen. Your brain processes environmental information constantly, preparing physiological responses before you consciously register a stressor. In urban environments, these early warning systems remain perpetually engaged. This constant background activation creates what researchers call urban allostatic loading, the cumulative physiological, where from repeated stress cycling. The Northwestern Urban Health Initiative's 5-year study documented how residents of high-stress urban neighborhoods accumulated approximately 2.7 times more allostatic load than suburban counterparts, despite reporting similar subjective stress levels. The implications extend beyond academic interest. Municipal governments are beginning to use aggregated biosensor data to identify urban stress hotspots requiring intervention. Helsinki City Planning Department redesigned several public squares after analyzing data from 4,200 volunteer residents whose biosensors consistently showed stress spikes in these areas. Simple modifications, adjusting lighting, adding sound-absorbing materials, and reconfiguring pedestrian flows reduced measurable physiological stress by 31% in subsequent testing. Biosensor technology has also revealed unexpected stress patterns across urban demographics. The Yale Urban Experience project documented how seemingly benign environments triggered dramatically different physiological responses based on factors including gender, race, and socioeconomic background. Women walking through well-lit but empty urban spaces at night showed sustained cortisol elevations compared to men in identical environments. Similarly, Black participants experienced significant stress biomarker elevations when encountering police officers in public spaces, a response not mirrored in white participants. These sensors finally provide objective evidence for differential urban experiences that marginalized populations have long reported, notes Dr. Janelle Thompson of the Center for Environmental Health Sciences. We're measuring the biological impact of moving through spaces where you feel unwelcome or unsafe, even when nothing overtly threatening occurs. The commercial application of this research has arrived in the form of real-time stress monitoring wearables. Devices like the Empatica E4 and Garmin stress tracking system continuously analyze physiological patterns to detect stress responses. A recent validation study found 3 consumer devices achieved over 89% accuracy compared to laboratory-grade equipment. For urban residents, these devices offer unprecedented insight into how specific environments affect their bodies. Users report altered commute routes, modified scheduling of stressful activities, and greater awareness of environmental factors previously ignored. Some employers in high-stress urban industries now offer biosensor monitoring as part of wellness programs, with early data suggesting significant reductions in stress-related absenteeism. The technology continues advancing rapidly. Next-generation sensors currently in development will add continuous glucose monitoring, inflammatory marker detection, and even real-time neurotransmitter sensing through non-invasive skin patches, expanding our ability to see the invisible threats our urban environments pose to our well-being. AI prediction, the future of urban mental health. Those chemical signatures detected 22 minutes before we're consciously aware of stress, they're the foundation for a revolution in mental health care. When these biosensor readings feed into advanced AI systems, they transform from simple warnings into powerful predictive tools. The question isn't whether technology can forecast your next anxiety attack. It's how we should use this capability when predictions prove accurate 82% of the time, up to 2 weeks before symptoms appear. Artificial intelligence transforms these biological signals of urban stress into forecasts of mental health trajectories. Much like meteorologists predict weather patterns days in advance, AI systems now generate mental health forecasts with remarkable precision. The Georgetown University Medical Center demonstrated this capability in their Urban Forecast project, where AI identified unique physiological signatures appearing consistently 7 to 14 days before depressive episodes, anxiety attacks, and manic states. The challenge is substantial. A person wearing modern biosensors generates over 100,000 daily data points across multiple physiological metrics. Machine learning algorithms excel at finding subtle patterns within these vast, complex data structures where human analysis would be overwhelmed. We discovered specific combinations of heart rate variability patterns, sleep disruptions, and cortisol fluctuations that reliably preceded mental health episodes, explains Dr. Eliza Ramirez, the project's lead researcher. These signatures were too complex for human clinicians to recognize, involving subtle interactions between seemingly unrelated physiological metrics. The most surprising finding was that these warning signatures appeared regardless of whether the person had experienced a mental health episode before. The AI could predict first-time episodes with nearly the same accuracy as recurrent ones, suggesting fundamental physiological patterns precede psychological distress. The technical architecture combines multiple AI approaches. Deep learning networks analyze sensor data for patterns, while natural language processing scans personal communications for linguistic changes. Reinforcement learning algorithms continuously improve predictions by incorporating feedback about which forecasts proved accurate. Environmental context adds another crucial dimension. Smartphones collect data about noise levels, light conditions, air quality, and location patterns that significantly enhance prediction accuracy. The MIT Urban Computing Lab demonstrated that incorporating environmental context alongside physiological data improved prediction accuracy from 67% to 84%. Environmental triggers aren't uniform, they're highly individualized, notes Dr. Ajay Patel, director of the MIT lab. By tracking which environments consistently precede stress responses for specific individuals, we can create much more accurate prediction models. These technical achievements raise important ethical questions about privacy, transparency, and potential discrimination. Current implementations require explicit opt-in consent and allow users to control when sensors are active and which data is shared. The New York Mental Health Consortium has developed an ethical framework requiring that prediction algorithms be explainable rather than black boxes, that users maintain complete control over their data, and that systems minimize potential harm from false predictions. These systems must augment human care rather than replace it, emphasizes Dr. James Richardson, the consortium's ethics director. The technology should create more meaningful human connections rather than substitute for them. Healthcare systems are implementing these prediction tools with promising results. Northwestern Memorial Hospital's pilot program with 500 depression patients showed participants experienced 61% fewer days of severe depression and 73% fewer emergency psychiatric visits compared to standard care. When the system predicted an imminent depressive episode, it triggered graduated interventions, first suggesting protective behaviors, then alerting care teams if markers continued deteriorating. The power of these systems lies in their individualized approach. Rather than applying population-level statistics, they learn each person's unique baseline and response patterns. The traditional approach using population averages misses crucial individual variations, explains Dr. Nadia Wong. One person might show stress primarily through disrupted sleep, while another exhibits minimal sleep changes but significant alterations in heart rate variability. Our systems learn these individual patterns. Beyond clinical settings, these systems offer tremendous potential for preventive mental health. The Durham Community Wellness Project provides voluntary biosensor monitoring to residents of high-stress neighborhoods, identifying early stress accumulation and suggesting personalized interventions before clinical symptoms emerge. We're shifting from a reactive to a preventive model, explains Project Director Sophia Williams. When someone's stress begins building toward dangerous levels, we can intervene weeks before they would traditionally seek help. The implications extend to community-level interventions. When anonymized and aggregated, prediction data reveals which urban factors most reliably precede mental health difficulties. The Cleveland Department of Public Health used this data to identify specific intersections where pedestrians consistently showed stress spikes. After implementing design changes, follow-up monitoring showed a 34% reduction in population-level stress responses at these locations. The most advanced systems now incorporate genetic and epigenetic information alongside real-time physiological data. Vanderbilt University research shows that certain genetic variants influence how individuals respond to urban stressors, allowing for even more personalized predictions and interventions. We've identified genetic markers that predict who will be most sensitive to noise disruption, who will show the strongest response to crowding and who will benefit most from specific interventions, notes Dr. Rebecca Chun. This allows us to move beyond one-size-fits-all approaches to truly personalized urban mental health. Mapping urban stress. The city as a living laboratory. Those personalized interventions for stress management are revealing something much larger when we step back and look at the city as a whole. When millions of individual stress responses are mapped across urban environments, they create intricate patterns that are fundamentally changing how we understand city planning. Barcelona's citywide stress mapping project shocked urban planners when it revealed that neighborhood noise levels triggered more severe physiological stress responses than local crime statistics. This finding represents a pattern emerging as major cities transform into vast living laboratories for mental health research. What we're seeing is revolutionary, explains Dr. Maria Alvarez, lead researcher on Barcelona's Urban Well-Being Initiative. For decades, we've designed cities around assumptions about what causes psychological distress. These new mapping technologies are showing us those assumptions were often wrong. The concept combines elegance with profound implications. By merging anonymized data from thousands of residents wearing biosensors with environmental monitoring systems and AI analysis, researchers create comprehensive stress heat maps showing precisely where, when, and how intensely residents experience psychological strain. These projects mark a fundamental shift in urban research methodology. Rather than relying on self-reported surveys or isolated clinical studies, cities now access continuous, objective measurements of population-level stress responses. The data distinguishes between different types of stress reactions and correlates them with specific environmental triggers. The Copenhagen Urban Experience project exemplifies this approach. The initiative equipped 3,700 residents with biometric sensors for 6 months while monitoring environmental factors throughout the city. Their AI system identified correlations between physiological stress signatures and urban features impossible to detect through traditional research methods. We discovered that certain street configurations consistently triggered stress responses regardless of traffic volume or noise levels, notes Dr. Soren Jensen, the project's technical director. Streets with tall buildings on both sides and limited visibility created measurable anxiety responses even when objectively safer than more open areas with better sight lines. This finding contradicts decades of crime prevention through environmental design principles, which emphasized clear sight lines primarily for security reasons. The biological data shows that psychological comfort depends more on perceived escape routes and spatial proportion than actual crime statistics. The real power of these mapping projects lies in their ability to identify specific microenvironments that disproportionately impact mental well-being. Tokyo's metropolitan government used stress mapping to identify 93 distinct urban stress hotspots throughout the city, locations where residents consistently experienced elevated cortisol levels and sympathetic nervous system activation. Many of these hotspots can be modified with relatively simple interventions. In Rotterdam, officials identified a particular intersection generating intense stress responses despite moderate traffic volumes. Analysis revealed that the combination of a complex crossing pattern, poor signage, and specific acoustic properties created a perfect storm of psychological strain. We implemented a 3-phase redesign, explains Rotterdam urban planner Joost van der Meer. First, we simplified the crossing pattern and improved signage. Then we added sound-absorbing materials to surrounding buildings. Finally, we incorporated gentle greenery to soften the visual environment. Subsequent measurements showed a 43% reduction in physiological stress markers at this location. These targeted, data-driven interventions represent a new paradigm in urban planning, one where psychological impact stands alongside traditional metrics like traffic flow and economic activity. In Melbourne, authorities use stress mapping to prioritize modifications throughout the central business district, resulting in measurable improvements in population-level stress biomarkers within months. The findings often challenge conventional wisdom about what makes a good urban environment. Milan's comprehensive stress mapping revealed that residents experienced more acute stress in certain aesthetically pleasing heritage districts than in more utilitarian modern areas. Further analysis showed that tourist density, navigation complexity, and less predictable pedestrian movements created significantly more psychological strain than the visual characteristics of the environment. Like a living organism with its own circulatory system, cities pulse with stress patterns that flow through transportation networks, commercial districts, and residential areas. Seoul's Urban Experience Laboratory created time-lapse visualizations showing these patterns, revealing stress tidal waves that surge through transportation systems during rush hours and distinct stress signatures associated with different districts as day transitions to night. These maps reveal the city as an almost living entity with its own metabolism and rhythms, notes Dr. Min-ji Park, the laboratory's founder. We can see how stress cascades through urban systems in patterns we never anticipated. The implications extend beyond individual well-being to broader public health considerations. Dublin's health services incorporated stress mapping data into their resource allocation models after discovering that emergency mental health calls clustered disproportionately around specific urban features. By modifying key locations, they achieved a 17% reduction in crisis mental health interventions within those areas. These mapping technologies also reveal how the same environment produces dramatically different responses across demographic groups. Portland's Inclusive Cities Initiative found that locations triggering minimal stress responses in middle-aged white residents often generated significant stress signatures in elderly residents, communities of color, and those with mobility limitations. The data shows us that we've been designing cities primarily for one demographic profile, explains urban sociologist Dr. James Wilson. When we map stress responses across diverse populations, we see entirely different patterns emerge. This gives us the opportunity to create truly inclusive urban environments that support everyone's mental well-being. What's particularly promising about this research approach is its scalability. While early projects required expensive custom sensors and complex infrastructure, newer systems leverage commercially available wearables and smartphone data to create accessible stress mapping tools for cities of all sizes. The most advanced projects are now moving beyond merely identifying problems to predictively modeling solutions. Minneapolis is using machine learning algorithms trained on its stress mapping data to simulate the psychological impact of proposed urban developments before construction begins. The inequality of urban stress. These cutting-edge mapping technologies have exposed a hidden reality about urban stress that challenges everything we thought we knew about city living. When researchers began analyzing the massive datasets from urban stress mapping projects, they discovered something alarming. The physiological signatures of chronic stress weren't distributed randomly across urban populations. Instead, they followed precise socioeconomic boundaries. A landmark study from a University of California Urban Health Initiative revealed a disturbing biological reality. Residents of low-income neighborhoods exhibit cortisol patterns matching those of combat veterans with PTSD. Their bodies remain in a constant state of physiological vigilance, with blunted morning cortisol spikes and elevated evening levels, a pattern associated with chronic trauma exposure. This biological divide traces the exact boundaries of economic inequality within our cities. Dr. Maya Henderson explains, we expected to see some variation based on socioeconomic status, but the magnitude of the difference was shocking. The physiological profiles of residents living just 10 blocks apart might as well have been from different planets. The contrast becomes even more apparent in specific biomarkers. Residents of disadvantaged neighborhoods show inflammatory markers 63% higher than those in affluent areas, with elevated C-reactive protein levels creating cascading health effects from cardiovascular disease to compromised immune function. Take Maria Gonzalez, a 38-year-old home health aide living in Chicago's South Side. Despite maintaining a healthy diet and regular exercise routine, her cortisol levels remain consistently elevated. I never realized how tense I was until I visited my sister in the suburbs, Maria shares. For the first time in years, I slept through the night without waking up to sirens or worrying about my kids' safety. What drives this dramatic disparity? Researchers point to compounded exposure to urban stressors. Lower-income neighborhoods face significantly higher environmental stress loads across multiple dimensions. Noise pollution averages 9 to 12 decibels higher than in affluent areas, particularly at night when rest is critical. Air quality monitoring reveals particulate matter concentrations up to 4.7 times higher in lower-income neighborhoods compared to wealthy areas just miles away. Dr. James Lee of Columbia University states, the same city contains dramatically different environmental realities depending on your zip code. This environmental inequality creates a physiological burden that accumulates over time. Beyond physical stressors, lower-income communities face neighborhood disorder, visible signs of neglect like abandoned buildings and broken infrastructure, which triggers additional psychological stress responses. These visual cues create environmental vigilance, taxing an already stressed nervous system. Critically, these neighborhoods typically lack stress-mitigating features. Green space, a proven buffer against psychological strain, is distributed unequally, with high-income neighborhoods having 62% more park space than low-income areas. When parks exist in disadvantaged neighborhoods, they're typically smaller, less maintained, and perceived as less safe. The Philadelphia Urban Stress Mapping Initiative revealed how these disparities manifest physiologically. Residents from affluent areas showed brief stress spikes that quickly returned to baseline levels during daily activities, while those from disadvantaged neighborhoods experienced sustained elevations in stress biomarkers throughout their routines. Dr. Kamala Patel, who led the Philadelphia study, explains, for residents in these neighborhoods, the body never fully returns to a relaxed state. The stress response becomes their normal operating condition. This physiological inequality creates a stress cascade. Chronic stress impairs cognitive function, decision-making, and emotional regulation, capabilities needed to navigate life's challenges. The resulting allostatic load accelerates biological aging and increases vulnerability to physical and mental health conditions. The Seattle Neighborhood Health Project documented how this stress inequality affects children's developing brains. Children in disadvantaged neighborhoods showed alterations in amygdala development, the brain region processing threat and fear, by age 7, predicting increased anxiety disorders and emotional regulation difficulties in adolescence. These stressors function like a perfect storm, creating what researchers call the urban stress multiplier effect. Each additional stressor amplifies the impact of others. Poor sleep quality from elevated nighttime noise makes individuals more reactive to daytime stressors. Chronic inflammation from air pollution reduces stress resilience. Limited green space removes a crucial buffer against accumulated stress. This multiplier effect explains why single intervention programs often fall short. Addressing just one stressor, like noise reduction or air quality improvement, typically shows modest benefits. The interlinked nature of urban stressors requires comprehensive approaches addressing multiple factors simultaneously. The healthcare implications are profound. Residents of disadvantaged neighborhoods face a 78% higher risk of anxiety disorders and 89% elevated risk of depression compared to those in affluent areas of the same cities. Disparities that persist even after controlling for individual income and education levels. Some cities have begun acknowledging this stress inequality gap in urban planning. Detroit now requires stress impact assessments for new developments in already burdened neighborhoods. Barcelona has implemented a stress equity index to guide municipal resource distribution. We can't separate urban health from issues of equity and justice, notes Dr. Marcus Williams. The physiological data makes it clear that certain populations are bearing a vastly disproportionate burden of urban stress, and that burden follows predictable patterns of historical disadvantage. Innovative approaches show promise. The Bronx Green Health Initiative documented how strategic intervention in 5 key neighborhood stress hotspots reduced population-level stress biomarkers by 27% within 18 months. The program targeted areas showing the highest physiological stress signatures with green space expansion, noise barriers, and community gathering spaces. The Green Space Solution call urban the success of the Bronx Green Health Initiative points to a fundamental pattern emerging in urban stress reduction efforts. Green spaces consistently show the most dramatic impact on physiological markers of well-being. University of Edinburgh researchers were stunned when their controlled study revealed that participants spending just 20 minutes in city parks showed an immediate 21.3% reduction in cortisol levels, comparable to the effects of some prescription medications used for anxiety management. This finding represents a critical pattern in public health research. Urban green spaces function as psychological reset zones within otherwise stressful urban environments, natural antidotes to the cumulative stress triggers throughout urban landscapes. Dr. Ming Kwa, director of the Landscape and Human Health Laboratory at the University of Illinois, describes them as islands of psychological safety where the nervous system can return to equilibrium. The challenge facing cities worldwide is how to incorporate sufficient nature access within increasingly dense urban environments where every square foot comes at a premium. This tension between development pressure and the biological necessity for green space has become one of the central conflicts in modern urban planning. With land values in major cities reaching record highs, developers and city officials face difficult choices about allocating space for parks versus housing, commercial spaces, or infrastructure. What makes this challenge particularly urgent is the evidence showing how even brief nature exposure triggers immediate physiological changes. A landmark 2019 study by the Urban Nature Research Consortium tracked participants wearing medical-grade sensors before, during, and after park visits across 6 major metropolitan areas. The results showed consistent patterns. Within minutes of entering green spaces, participants exhibited decreased blood pressure, average reduction of 9%, improved heart rate variability, and progressive declines in muscle tension. Imagine stepping from a concrete sidewalk into a pocket park. The sound of traffic fades behind a curtain of leaves. Dappled sunlight replaces the harsh glare of building windows, and the rigid geometry of urban architecture gives way to the organic curves of nature. This sensory transition acts like a switch, flipping the body from a high-alert state to one of restoration. Dr. Kathleen Wolfe, research social scientist at the University of Washington, notes, even modest pocket parks measuring less than an acre showed significant effects. The critical factor appears to be the sensory shift from built environments to spaces with vegetation, natural light patterns, and different acoustic qualities. The physiological mechanisms behind these effects are well documented. When we encounter natural environments, our parasympathetic nervous system, the body's rest and digest mode, becomes more active. This counteracts the sympathetic fight or flight dominance common in urban settings. The visual processing of natural fractals, repeating patterns found in tree branches and leaves, reduces neural activity in brain regions associated with stress. Meanwhile, aromatic compounds released by plants influence immune function, while natural soundscapes activate different neural pathways than mechanical urban sounds. This multi-sensory engagement creates what neuroscientists term soft fascination, a state of effortless attention that allows depleted cognitive resources to replenish. Research has identified a clear relationship between nature exposure time and benefits. Brief exposures of 5 to 10 minutes produce measurable but modest effects. However, benefits substantially increase between the 15 to 30-minute mark, with optimal benefits occurring around 20 to 30 minutes. Dr. Mary Carol Hunter, lead researcher at the University of Michigan School of Environment and Sustainability, explains, the 20-minute threshold appears to be when we see the most significant hormonal shifts, particularly in cortisol regulation. This time frame aligns with what we understand about how stress hormone systems respond to environmental changes. The psychological benefits complement these physiological changes. University of Chicago researchers found that 25 minutes in green space improved directed attention performance by 16% and working memory capacity by 14% compared to equivalent time spent in built environments. These cognitive improvements persisted for approximately 40 to 50 minutes after returning to urban settings, suggesting a protective carryover effect. This research has led to the development of minimum viable nature exposure guidelines, recommendations for the smallest dose of nature needed for meaningful health benefits. The current scientific consensus points to 20 to 30 minutes, 3 times weekly, as the minimum threshold for maintaining psychological equilibrium in high-stress urban environments. What makes these findings particularly significant is their remarkable consistency across demographics, cultures, and socioeconomic groups. Studies comparing responses across diverse urban populations, from Helsinki to Singapore, Mexico City to Sydney, show similar patterns in stress biomarker changes following nature exposure. This universality suggests that our physiological need for natural environments isn't a preference or luxury. It's a biological necessity hardwired into our nervous systems through evolution. The implications for public health are substantial. A comprehensive economic analysis calculated that increasing accessible green space in urban environments could reduce annual healthcare expenditures by approximately $3.08 billion in the United States alone through reductions in stress-related conditions. Dr. Howard Frumkin, former director of the National Center for Environmental Health at the CDC, notes, "The evidence base for green space as a public health intervention has reached a point where we can confidently include it alongside other evidence-based prevention strategies." Green spaces function like natural pharmacies dispersed throughout the urban landscape, offering free, accessible stress reduction with no prescription required. While individual techniques like meditation show similar efficacy, they require consistent personal initiative. Green spaces provide passive benefits simply through proximity and brief use, making them uniquely valuable public health assets. Research also shows that biodiversity amplifies these benefits. Spaces with greater ecological complexity produce stronger reductions in stress biomarkers than manicured landscapes, suggesting urban green spaces should prioritize ecological richness rather than just aesthetic appeal. Redesigning cities for mental well-being. The ecological richness of biodiversity found in parks has inspired a radical reimagining of what buildings themselves can be. In downtown Singapore stands a structure that defies conventional urban design, the Oasia Hotel Downtown, a tower wrapped in 750% more vegetation than the land it occupies. This isn't mere aesthetic decoration, but part of an evidence-based revolution in how we design cities for mental health. This architectural marvel, designed by Woha architects, represents a fundamental shift in urban philosophy. Its crimson aluminum mesh exterior hosts 21 species of climbing plants that create a living facade, a vertical ecosystem providing habitat for birds, insects, and other urban wildlife, while simultaneously serving as a psychological buffer for human occupants. The building creates its own microclimate, with temperatures around its green exterior measuring 2 to 3 degrees Celsius cooler than surrounding structures. This approach to architecture reflects a growing understanding that our built environment directly shapes our psychological experience. Traditional urban design has prioritized efficiency, density, and economic productivity, often at the expense of mental well-being. Now, architects, urban planners, and public health experts are collaborating to reimagine cities as environments that support psychological flourishing. The challenge is monumental. Most urban infrastructure was designed and built long before we understood its psychological impacts. Retrofitting existing cities to reduce stress while maintaining necessary density presents complex technical, financial, and logistical hurdles. Innovations must work within existing urban frameworks to avoid environmental damage and displacement. Vertical gardens like those at Singapore's Oasia Hotel represent a powerful solution. These systems can be retrofitted onto existing structures, transforming concrete surfaces into living ecosystems. Walking past that building changed my entire day, explains Mei Lin, a Singapore resident who commutes past the structure daily. The greenery calms my mind before I even arrive at work. Research from the National University of Singapore found that residents living adjacent to buildings with extensive vertical gardens showed measurably lower stress biomarkers and reported 24% fewer headaches and 21% fewer symptoms of anxiety compared to those near conventional buildings. These living systems function as urban air filters, capturing particulate pollution while releasing oxygen and plant-derived compounds with positive psychological effects. Building upon these vertical innovations, rooftop transformation represents another frontier in urban redesign. New York City's Brooklyn Grange operates the world's largest rooftop soil farms, converting over 5.6 acres of unused roof space into productive agricultural ecosystems. Up here, I forget I'm in the city, shares Marcus Johnson, a Brooklyn resident who volunteers at the farm. My thoughts slow down, and I connect with something bigger than myself. Studies conducted by Columbia University found that 30-minute sessions in these rooftop environments reduced participants' cortisol levels by an average of 17%, while improving working memory performance by 12%. These benefits flow together with those provided by vertical gardens, creating layered urban experiences that nurture mental health. Connecting these interventions is biophilic design, a comprehensive approach reshaping how we conceive urban structures. This design philosophy incorporates natural elements, patterns, and processes into the built environment. Biophilic buildings feature abundant natural light, natural materials, water features, irregular geometric patterns that mimic natural forms, and spatial arrangements that create both prospect and refuge. The Amazon spheres in Seattle exemplify this approach. 3 interconnected glass domes housing more than 40,000 plants from over 30 countries. Emma Chen, a software engineer who works in the Spheres Weekly, describes the environment as transformative for my creativity. Problems that seemed insurmountable in the office suddenly become manageable here. Microsoft has documented a 15% increase in reported well-being and a 13% improvement in problem-solving efficiency when teams work in these biophilic environments compared to conventional office spaces. Technology enhances these innovations. Design tools help architects optimize buildings for psychological impact, while noise mapping technologies reshape the acoustic landscape of cities. Advanced sound monitoring networks have created detailed acoustic maps, informing strategic placement of sound barriers, vegetation buffers, and sound-absorbing materials. London's Tranquil City initiative has mapped over 160 acoustically protected spaces throughout the metropolis, while implementing innovative noise reduction strategies. These interventions have reduced average noise levels in targeted areas by 9 to 11 decibels, translating to measurable decreases in stress biomarkers among residents. Finding these quiet pockets changed how I experience the city, notes London resident James Alvarez. They've become essential to maintaining my mental balance. The impacts of these design interventions are compelling. Vienna's Aspern-Seestadt district has documented a 27% reduction in stress-related medical visits among residents compared to similar demographic groups in conventional neighborhoods. Copenhagen's integration of biophilic design principles into its Årestad district correlates with 31% lower anxiety medication usage compared to city averages. Singapore's Biophilic Town Framework has transformed several neighborhoods with comprehensive green infrastructure. A 5-year study tracking residents found a 19% reduction in diagnosed mood disorders, a 23% decrease in hypertension cases, and measurable improvements in sleep quality across all demographic groups. These results highlight a crucial insight. Well-designed urban environments measurably enhance our physiological and psychological functioning. The effect sizes rival those of many pharmaceutical interventions, suggesting that architectural and urban design should be considered legitimate public health strategies. Substantial challenges remain. Retrofitting existing cities is expensive, and improved neighborhoods often become unaffordable to original residents. Some critics question whether these approaches address deeper social and economic causes of urban stress. Yet the evidence for design-based interventions continues to mount. The World Health Organization now recognizes urban design as a critical factor in psychological well-being, and major financial institutions have begun funding urban redesign specifically targeting mental health outcomes. As architect Jan Gehl famously observed, first we shape cities, then they shape us. The emerging science of urban well-being suggests we can reshape our cities to support rather than strain human psychology. Throughout this journey, we've seen how urban environments impact our mental well-being through multiple pathways, from noise pollution to disrupted sleep, crowding to isolation. The emergence of biometric monitoring, AI prediction systems, and stress mapping is revolutionizing our understanding of these invisible threats. This knowledge is rapidly transforming our cities. Urban centers worldwide are reimagining themselves with psychological health as a priority, incorporating nature and using technology to identify intervention areas. The urban future holds promise. As we build smarter cities, how will you incorporate these insights into your daily life? Your awareness of urban stress responses might be the first step toward